The religion situation. Religions prevalent at the time played merely a marginal role in the life of the Arabs before the advent of Islam. The polytheists who pretended to adhere to the religion of Abraham were far removed from its principles and inherent ethics. They indulged in disobedience, ungodliness, and peculiar superstitions that left deleterious effects on the religious and socio-political life in Arabia. Judaism turned into a system of repulsive hypocrisy and the struggle for power. Rabbis turned into lords to the exclusion of the Lord. Their sole ambition was gaining wealth and power, even if it was at the risk of losing their religion or the emergence of atheism and disbelief. Likewise, Christianity opened its door wide to polytheism and turned too complicated to comprehend. As a religious system, it developed a peculiar mix of beliefs regarding man and God. It exercised no influence whatsoever on the souls of the Arabs who accepted it, and simply because it did not concern itself with the lifestyle and did not have the least relationship with their practical life. People of other religions were similar to the polytheists with respect to their inclinations, dogmas, customs, and traditions. Aspects of pre-Islamic Arabian society. After the research we have made into the religious and political life of Arabia, it is appropriate to speak briefly about the social, economic, and ethical conditions prevalent therein. Social life of the Arabs. Arab society presented a social mixture with different and diverse social levels. Women among the social elite were accorded a high degree of esteem and enjoyed considerable free will. Their decision would be enforced, and they were so highly cherished that they would be easily shed in defense of their honor. In fact, they were the most decisive factors that held the key to bloody fighting or friendly peace. These privileges, notwithstanding the family system in Arabia, was wholly practical, according supremacy to the older members of the clan. The marriage contract resented completely in the hands of the woman's legal guardian, whose words with regard to her material status could never be questioned. On the other hand, there were other social circles where prostitution and indecency were widespread and full operation. Al-Bukhari and others reported on authority of Aisha alayhi salam that there were 4 kinds of marriage in pre-Islamic Arabia. The first was similar to present-day marriage procedures, in which case a man gives his daughter or the woman under his responsibility in marriage to another man after proposal and a dowry. The second, the husband would send his wife after a menstrual period to cohabit with another man in order to conceive. After conception, her husband, if he desired, would have intercourse with her. A third kind was that a group of less than 10 men would have intercourse with a woman. If she conceived and gave birth to a child, she would send for these men, and nobody could abstain. They would come together to her house. She would say, "You know what you have done. I have given birth to a child, and it is your child," pointing to one of them. The man indicated in this number would have to accept. The fourth kind was the large number of men would have intercourse with a certain woman who would not prevent anyone. Such women would use to affix a certain flag of their gates to invite people in. If this prostitute got pregnant and gave birth to a child, she would collect these men in series and tell whose child it was. The appointed father would take the child and declare him or her as own. When Prophet Muhammad ﷺ declared the advent of Islam in Arabia, he cancelled all the form of contact except that of the present Islamic marriage. Women always accompanied men in wars. The victors would freely have intercourse with such women, but disgrace would follow the children conceived in this way of their life. Pre-Islam Arabs had no limit to the number of wives they could take. They could marry 2 sisters at the time, or even the wives of their fathers if divorced or widowed. And marry not women whom father married, except what has already passed. Indeed, it was shameful and most hateful and evil way. Forbidden to you for marriage are your mothers, your daughters, your sisters, your father's sisters, your mother's sisters, your brother's daughters, your sister's daughters, your foster mother, who gave you your foster milk, sisters, your wives' mothers, your stepdaughters, and your guardianship, born of your wives, to whom you have gone in. But there is no sin on you if you have not gone in them to marry their daughters, the wives of your sons from your own loins, and two sisters in wedlock at the same time, except for what has already passed. Verily, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is oft forgiving, most merciful. To a very great extent, divorce was in the power of a husband. The evil of adultery prevailed among all social classes except for a few men and women whose self-respect prevented them from committing such an act. Free women were in much better conditions than the female slaves who bore the brunt of this shameful practice. Apparently, the great majority of pre-Islamic Arabs did not feel ashamed of committing this evil. Abu Dawud reported, a man stood up in front of Prophet Muhammad and said, O Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that boy is my son. Claim in Islam for pre-Islamic affairs, a child is to be attributed to one of whose bed it was born, and stoning is a law on the forced later. The story of Sa'ad bin Abi Waqas and Abd bin Zamah disputing over Abdul Rahman bin Zamah, the son of Zamah, is well known. With respect to pre-Islam Arab relation with his offspring, we see the life in Arabia with inconsistent and presented a dark picture of contrast. While some Arabs held children dear to their hearts and cherished them greatly, others buried their female children alive because an imaginary fear of poverty and shame weighed heavily on them, and they would kill their children for fear of poverty and hardship. And do not kill your children because of poverty, we provide for you. And when the news of the birth of a female child is brought to any of them, his face becomes dark and he is filled with inward grief. He hides himself from the people because of the evil of that whereof he has been informed. Shall he keep her with dishonor or bury her in the earth? Certainly evil is their decision. And do not kill your children for fear of poverty, we provide them for you. And when the female infant buried alive shall be questioned. We should not think, however, that the act of killing infants was commonplace and widespread simply because they needed sons to fight with them against their enemies. Another aspect of Arab life which deserves mention is the Baidoun's deep-seated emotional attachment to his clan. Family, or perhaps tribal pride, was one of the strongest passions with him. The doctrine of unity of blood was the principle that bound the Arabs into a social unit, and it was formed and supported by tribal pride. Their undisputed motto was support your brother whether he is an oppressor or oppressed. In its literal meaning, they disregarded the Islamic amendment which states that supporting an oppressor brother means preventing him from aggression. Desire for leadership, a keen sense of competition, and ambition to excel others often resulted in bitter tribal warfare, despite having descended from one common ancestor. In his regard, the continued bloody conflicts of Aus and Khazaraj, Abs and Duhbain, Bakr and Takhlib, etc., are striking examples. Intertribal relationships were fragile and weak due to continual destructive intertribal wars. However, a deep devotion to religious superstitions and some esteemed custom used to control their reckless tendency to quench their thirst for blood. In other cases, factors like the respect for alliances, loyalty, and codependency could successfully bring an spirit of affinity and put an end to groundless bases of dispute. A time-honored custom of suspending hostilities during the prohibited months, Muharram, Rajab, Dhul Qada, and Dhul Hijjah, functioned favorably and provided an opportunity for them to earn their living and coexist in peace. We may sum up the social situation in Arabia by saying that the Arabs of the pre-Islamic period were going about in ignorance and darkness, entangled in a mesh of superstitions, paralyzing their mind and driving them to lead a cattle-like existence. The woman was marketable commodity and regard of a piece of intimate property. Intertribal relationships were fragile. Greed in wealth and involvement is useless. Wars were the main objective that governed the self beliefs and chiefs.